A young man who had a bitter disappointment in life went to a remote monastery and said to the master, "I am disillusioned with life and wish to attain enlightenment to be freed from these sufferings, but I have no capacity for sticking long at anything. I could never do long years of meditation and study and austerity. I should relapse and be drawn back to the world again, painful though I know it to be. Is there any short way for people like me?" "There is," said the master, "if you are really determined. Tell me, what have you studied? What have you concentrated on most in your life?" "Why, nothing really. We were rich, and I did not have to work. I suppose the thing I was really interested in was chess. I spent most of my time at that." The master thought for a moment, and then said to his attendant, "Call such and such a monk, and tell him to bring a chessboard and men." The monk came with the board, and the master set up the pieces. He sent for a sword and showed it to the two. "O monk," he said, "you have vowed obedience to me as your master, and now I require it of you. You will play a game of chess with this youth, and if you lose, I shall cut off your head with this sword. But I promise that you will be reborn in the Pure Land. If you win, I shall cut off the head of this man. Chess is the only thing he has ever tried hard at, and if he loses, he deserves to lose his head also." They looked at the master's face and saw that he meant it. He would cut the head of the loser. Then they began to play. With the opening moves, the youth felt the sweat trickling down to his heels as he played for his life. The chessboard became the whole world. He was entirely concentrated on it. At first he had somewhat the worst of it, but then the other made an inferior move, and he seized his chance to launch a strong attack. As his opponent's position crumbled, he looked covertly at him. He saw a face of intelligence and sincerity, worn with years of austerity and effort. He thought of his own worthless life, and a wave of compassion came over him. He deliberately made a blunder, and then another blunder, ruining his position and leaving himself defenceless. The master suddenly leant forward and upset the board. The two contestants sat stupefied. "There is no winner and no loser," said the master slowly. "There is no head to fall here. Only two things are required," and he turned to the young man: "complete concentration and compassion. You have today learnt them both. You were completely concentrated on the game, but then in that concentration you could feel compassion and sacrifice your life for it. Now stay here a few months and pursue our training in this spirit, and your awakening is sure." So this is a story from the collection of stories from the book The Wisdom of the Zen Masters by Irmgard Schlegel, the preordination name of Myokyo-ni, known posthumously as Master Daiyu Myokyo. And here we have a story. We don't fully know exactly where it's set. All we know is that it involves a young rich boy or young man who has suffered some kind of disillusionment. And here we are. This recording is taking place in Rahatsu Week, which is the first 8 days of December, which in the Northeastern tradition is the commemoration of the Buddha's enlightenment. If we remember that the Buddha also suffered a disillusionment as a youth, as a prince, he took 4 fateful trips out of the palace, and there he encountered impermanence in the shape of old age, sickness, and death. And this rocked his world. This is where this young man, this young prince who really had everything, and basically had lived in a gilded cage, which was the palace. But that palace really was gilded. I mean, his father made sure that he had everything because of a prophecy that had been given at the young man's birth, when his father was told that either your son will grow up to have one of two destinies: either he will be a great world ruler and a king like his father, or he will become a sage and a great religious teacher. And of course, the father, wanted his son to grow up like him, be a king and a world ruler, and he knew something very important, and that is that one of the great motivating factors for people setting out on a spiritual life is the disillusionment with the world. And we see this again and again in the Zen canon. Either people have suffered a disillusionment and come into the training, or they come into the training and then the circumstances cause them to become disillusioned in some particular way. For example, if we remember the story of Master Kyogen, who was a very learned monk and had a very strong and powerful memory and had memorized all the sutras, but when he was asked by his master, "Where will you go when you die?" Kyogen couldn't find an answer in his memory, so he consulted all his books, and there he also couldn't find the answer to that question either. And then suddenly it became something very personal to him. "Kyogen, where will you go when you die?" And this really frightened him. And so for 3 days and 3 nights, he forewent food and sleep and became absolutely obsessed, but couldn't find the answer. And in the end, he went to the master and demanded to know where he would go when he died. And the master said, "Kyogen," he said, "I won't rob you of your insight. I cannot tell you. I will not rob you of your insight." At which point Kyogen snapped and laid violent hands on the master and threatened him and said, "Either you will tell me or I will kill you." And the master laughed and said, "Do you think my corpse will give you the answer?" At which point, that's like a slap in the face. Kyogen came to his senses and realized that he had laid violent hands on his own master, and that obviously meant that not only would he have to leave the monastery, he would have to forego any further training, any further monkish discipline in this life. And so that was the moment when he suffered his disillusionment, and he travelled around for 10 years until he settled at the mausoleum of the 6th patriarch. And there he used to keep it clean and repaired and welcome visitors, pilgrims, to the mausoleum, accommodating them and cooking them food. And in this way, he earns enough money to, keep himself. And that went on for another 10 years until finally one day, as he always did, after he swept the path in front of the mausoleum, he'd collected the bits and pieces, the pebbles and so forth, into a bucket, which he then threw into a bamboo thicket. And as he did that, one particular pebble clicked against the bamboo, and he had a profound awakening from that. And for the first time in 20 years, he put on his monk's robes, went to the top of a nearby hill and prostrated 9 times in the direction of the monastery that he had originally trained with, in gratitude that indeed the master, even at threat of his own life, had not robbed Kyogen of his own insight. So here we see something very, very similar. As with the Buddha's story, we see this disillusionment and then this long spiritual journey, which involved undergoing training with 2 masters, equaling them in their spiritual understanding, being offered the lineage and refusing and going on because he wanted to get to the bottom. He was driven to get to the bottom of this question about human suffering, what is called dukkha, or dissatisfactoriness. And then he went into the forest, underwent the great privations, took the 5 ascetics who then looked up to him as their guru. And when he realized that path too was fruitless, he abandoned that too and finally settled himself underneath the Bodhi tree, where he sits. According to the Zen tradition, this took place not in the sweaty jungles, but actually in the snowy mountains of the north in China. And there he sat for 8 days. 7 days and 7 nights, and on the morning of the 8th day, looked up, and in the morning sky, clear morning sky, he perceived the morning star, and as that perception entered into his heart, he awoke and became the Buddha. which means the awakened one. And so all these stories have a very similar shape to them. And the point is that it's about finding an escape from dukkha. And, let's face it, for all of us, we all want our problems to come to an end. We don't want to suffer. We don't want to be dissatisfied. We don't want to feel this lack. And yet, for the spiritual journey, it's just that provides the impetus, provides the motivation that causes us to be moved to undertake, this walking along the path, so, as it did for all the Zen masters, and obviously including the Buddha himself. And what's interesting here is that this particular young man not only suffers from the disillusionment, and by the way, we have no idea what that disillusionment is. I mean, maybe we could guess. Maybe he was jilted at the altar. Young man, that sort of thing is certainly very common. But it may have been something else, maybe it was a betrayal, maybe something that, he had been brought up to have complete faith in, had now let him down. Those who are familiar with the story of Soka Morinaga, in his book Pointers to Insight, that was re-released as the book from novice to master, will know that, in the aftermath of the Second World War, when he was a young man and he went to college, and he said many of his peers turned to crime. This is suffering from a disillusionment. It's an extremely precarious state to be in. It could go either way. It could we could reject the world, but reject it in a sense of deep betrayal, and anger and bitterness can arise out of it, and that can turn very sour and turn into ill will. Or it can provide the necessary spur, the necessary motivation to seek the peace at heart. So these are two paths that can be taken, and hence why disillusionment is a very precarious state to be in. For Soka Morinaga, he sought the truth. He wanted to find something, because everything that he had been told about the emperor and about the Japanese being supreme, and no one would be able to defeat them because the emperor was a god and so forth. All this turned out to be a lie, and this was a great betrayal. So a very difficult time. Fortunately for him, he did seek, and eventually he found Master Sojun, and who listened to his story for 3 hours, it said, complaining bitterly about how he had lost trust in everything and everyone, and that he would never be able to trust anyone again. And when he came to the end of it, Sojun had said nothing all this time. He'd just listened. And Sojun said, well, I may be able to help you, but you're going to have to trust me 100%. And Soka Morinaga, in his own words, said, I thought this man was a complete fool. 3 hours I had told him exactly why I couldn't trust anyone. And then he said I had to trust him 100%. But I had nowhere else to go. I had nowhere else to go. And so I said yes. And it's that it's that combination of necessity that when one feels and one thinks, and it might not even be true, that I have nowhere else to go. This is the end of the line. And so one then is really forced to turn around in oneself and to abandon whatever it is that I'm holding on to. And it's the case with this young man too. This young man was convinced that, he was a wastrel, basically, that he, wasn't up to very much. He was a spoilt brat. He had been pampered, and he didn't have to work, and he was rich, and he could do what he liked. And this is why the master had to ask him, well, what are you good at? Fortunately, he said chess. This was the one thing. So that was the hook on which the master managed to sort of reel him in bit by bit. But it's interesting because the young man was convinced by these self-beliefs. And this is the whole point about I. This is why the Buddha said that this I is a delusion. I'm obsessed by my identity, by, who I am, and, what I like and what I don't like, and what I believe and what my opinions are, and what I can do and what I can't do, and all these things. And these are all restrictions. These are all things where I paint myself into a corner, and then I sort of, plead poverty. But I've painted myself into that corner by those beliefs. And really what the master had to show him was that, in fact, he did have these capacities, but he had to manufacture a scenario that really caused the young man to abandon his self-beliefs. And that was the chess match, with either if you lose your head. If you win, you survive, and that's it. And what's really fascinating, I think, about this story is that with the monk who was playing him, the chess opponent, of course, the monk will have made a vow to obey the master in all circumstances, and so the master could call on that vow. And really, the monk would have had no choice but to go along with this. Even at the threat of his own life. But the young man had made no such vow. There was nothing keeping him there. At any moment, he did not have to submit to the sword of the master. He could have just got up and walked out and said, I'm not participating in this idiocy at all. But the interesting thing was that it never occurred to him. And I think that this is a very important point here that can easily be missed. That quite often the heart itself conspires in our own in this ploy to force us through a barrier and beyond, to see beyond, that there is something that truly that lies beyond. And this is really the whole point, this concentration and this compassion as well. It's not just the case of concentration, because concentration on its own can just become naked ambition. And that very quickly falls back to I, me, and mine. And wherever consciousness gets filled with I, me, and mine, then there's no room for others. And this isn't the Buddha's way either. It just causes, in the end, more heartbreak as I cling ever more tightly to me, rather than allowing it to let go, and to discover that the heart is vast and empty, and also by nature quiet as well. This is a quality. This quietness is not the absence of sound, it's a quality of consciousness, like the spaciousness is a quality of consciousness. It's not a literal spaciousness. And so these things have to be, discovered. And it's and this is really what we suffer from. We suffer from a lack of faith in our own heart. This is why we feel that we can't. We feel that life is too much. We feel abandoned, and so on. But the truth is, we have a great repository within us. This is the teaching of particularly Mahayana Buddhism, but really all the Buddhas as well. That the state of the heart itself is Buddha. Is already awakened. It's already miraculous. But unfortunately, because the clouds of the delusion of I cover it up, we are not aware of it. We're not aware of it at all. And so we have to go through these situations and out through the other side to discover that these self-beliefs were the very restrictions that were causing me to suffer and be dissatisfied in the first place. And it's a little bit, like that story of Master Bankei, the great 18th century Zen master. And an old man comes to him and asks him if he can become his pupil. And Bankei says, well, you're a bit old. Normally it's young people who come and want to train in Zen because it's a very arduous life. And the old man says, well, I have no choice. There we go. You say, I have no choice. I am old and I am facing my own mortality, and I'm frightened. And what I want is the confidence to be able to face death. And Bankei immediately replies, he said, there is no special confidence that you need. He said, when the time to die comes, it is sufficient for you to die. Now, I remember first hearing that story and thinking that sounded rather callous, a rather facetious answer to an old man who was genuinely afraid of his own mortality. But of course, Bankei is correct. basically what he was saying to the old man was, look, what you are afraid of right now isn't death, because you're not dying. Not now. What you're frightened of is the thought of your own death, the way that you imagine your own death to be and what it means. And this is what you're frightened of. But the truth is that there is a strength in the heart, and when it's needed, it's there. And when the time to die comes, it will be there, just as it was there at your birth as well, when you also needed great strength as well to be born. And it was there, but because there was no I there at the time, the whole thing is quite natural, quite organic, and just comes to be of itself. And then when it's no longer needed, it just appears to disappear back into the never never. But just because we can't see it does not mean that it isn't there. And this really is, not only what Master Bankei was pointing out to this old man, that he didn't need to worry. Really what he suffered from was a lack of faith in his own heart Buddha. And that's also what this master is showing this young man as well. He's saying, look, you do have it, but I can't just say that to you. You must discover it for yourself, which means you must go through this ordeal, and you must believe it, that your life is on the line. And that will evoke this great strength, this great inner power within you. That is the power of the heart Buddha, because this power of the heart Buddha has nothing to do with I cannot ginger it up by an act of will. It responds to circumstances, because that is the nature of the world. The nature of the world isn't me and you, or me and the world. It's joined up. It always has been. And so things arise due to circumstances. When the circumstances require something to be, then it is. Thank you.